we're privileged to have Lamont Worthy come and deliver that message.
Thank you, Carlton. So, just for today's safety minute, I like to talk about glare on our windshields from the sun and other bright lights. So, glare is a common hazard that drivers face on the road every day, whether it's from the sun or high beams. From oncoming vehicles, drivers can be blinded for a few seconds longer than common from sources of glare. A driver traveling at average highway speeds will cross half the distance of a football field by the time they can recover from the glare. So some of the for avoiding and dealing with glare while you're driving is to not look directly into the glare or the source of the light. Also, when using your high beams, dim them within 500 feet of oncoming vehicles and within 300 feet of vehicles that you are following. Be prepared for glare from the sun to be more intense when the sun is rising or setting. These are suggestions from the Utah Safety Council. Also, just know with the days growing shorter, the glare can be more intense. It's a good idea to try and clear your windshields of debris, streaks, because that can intensify the glare. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont. Next up was our approval of our minutes from September the 11th.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes as written for September 11th, 2019.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.
Mr. Chair, if I could, there were no public comment either.
Okay, thank you for catching my oversight there. I appreciate it, Bob. Next then is the agency report. Carolyn, good morning.
Good morning. Just two items on the agency report. One is there is an additional Tiger Grant opportunity that we were notified of, where they have additional sources, about 6.9 million available, the federal government does, and so they went out to the existing grant recipients of Tiger Grants to see if there was any possibilities. This was a very fast deadline, like within 24 hours. So we put forth the Depot District requesting pretty much the full amount of the 6.9, and the Mill Creek bike lanes of approximately $200,000 additional. We haven't heard yet because they reach across the entire country. We should hear any time now.
Do we have any sense on the Depot District? Would it be sort of additions that, or is this really to close a budget yet? I mean, how would we use the money on the Depot District?
I think we would look at, obviously, if there's making sure that we can fund the project, but that would probably reduce our bonding need.
I see. Okay.
So the other item is that the South Carolina Chamber Tour, which is I think today, is that correct? They're in Charleston. A group from Charleston is in this week, and so they actually have a complimentary shuttle service. They're actually going to see, I think, UVX and a couple other things. So just to let you know and notify you of that service that UTA is providing for them.
Great, thank you. Nick, first up is on item 7 is contracts, disbursements, and grants, and we have the light rail vehicle wrap with the turbo images. You'll have to explain what turbo images are.
Good morning. This contract is with, as you mentioned, Turbo Images to apply vinyl wraps to 37 light rail vehicles as part of our overhaul program. Turbo Images is just an organization, a company that was awarded the contract. Total contract amount is $424,871, and this process will rebrand the vehicles to look similar to our newer S70s. I know during as you've gone out and toured the light rail facility, you've seen some of our newer vehicles. They look really nice, much more updated. Rebranding will consist of the contractor prepping the vehicles and applying the vinyl wrap. So after we paint those vehicles, then they'll come in and apply the vinyl wrap and make them look the way they do. And the cost per vehicle on this is about $11,483. Any questions?
Eddie, how well does the vinyl wrap hold up versus sort of a similar kind of paint thing?
Right, so it is a combination of the two things, just to keep in mind. So all the white portion that you see is paint. So they'll paint the vehicles first, and then they'll come in and then they'll put the red and blue on the sides as well as the lettering. But, you know, the 99 cars that we have out there today, they haven't been redone since 99. But most of the information I've looked at is that a wrap is designed to last about 7 to 8 years.
So pretty durable then.
It's pretty durable material, and the material gets better and better each and every year. You know, back several years ago when wraps became a thing, you know, they were a little less durable, but they just continue to get thicker and more pliable.
Probably cheaper than trying to paint them.
It is. That's
What's the art of painting them?
It becomes very labor intensive if you think about all the taping and things like that you would have to do. And it also makes it quick and easy. If you have an accident, you can literally just, you know, cut that one single piece of the vinyl and replace it. You don't have to repaint the whole thing.
Okay, that's good to know. Any other questions on this contract? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve the light rail vehicle wraps contract.
I will second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks, Eddie. We're now to our discussion items, and also would just note that in item C, the continuation of our 2020 budget discussion, that we completed what we needed to yesterday in our budget workshop, and so we won't have anything. I don't anticipate anything on item C. But we'll start with our low-income fare strategy, and Monica Martin's with us. Welcome, Monica.
Okay. I've prepared an outline here. First, I'm going to go over some key elements of reduced fares with you, just to give you a basis for our discussion today. And then I'm going to go over 3 agency examples. I'll share with you just a reminder of some of the UTA reduced fares that we offer. And then I would like to discuss some challenges and some of my recommendations, and then talk about next steps and get your feedback and comments. So the first element is population identification. Reduced fares are made available to target populations to serve those in need. This could include several groups, such as refugees, people with disabilities, those enrolled in job training programs, people experiencing homelessness, Medicare cardholders, Medicaid recipients, veterans, or those earning income at the federal poverty level. The poverty level income levels help determine eligibility for government programs and benefits, and many transit agencies are using that right now to identify populations that can participate in reduced fare programs.
You happen to know, and I in my old job I would have known that number, but what is that number? Do you know?
I do not know.
Okay.
I came prepared with everything else here in this stack. I want to say it's around 20, I remember the number 25,000, and I can't remember if that's for a household of one or how many. Eligibility determination is another element. Because reduced fares are only made available to target populations, it's necessary to put processes in place to determine whether the rider is eligible or not, based on select criteria. Past distribution. Once eligibility has been determined, we need to distribute the fare media, and reduced fares are not always distributed through our normal distribution channels. Discount amount, typically a discount amount will be set, or special pricing will be made available. The products that can be purchased with the discount should be identified. In many cases, it's limited to select products, not all of the fare products offered. such as a one-way, a day pass, or a monthly pass, and part of that is for ease of administration. And the last attribute is fare media. Typically, it is marked to designate a reduced fare and may include a photo. It may also require an accompanying form of ID to verify the identity of the rider that's using that fare media. So we looked at several transit agencies and did some research on how they are offering affordable transportation options. And my time is limited here today, so I won't go over all of our research, but I would like to share some of our findings with you. It's been very encouraging to see the progress of the transit agencies over the past year. They're making great strides towards more affordable transit for the people that rely on it most. One example is Capital Metro of Austin, Texas, and they have been reducing barriers to self-sufficiency for many years. They established a creative partnership focused on low-income individuals with income at 150% or below the federal poverty level. They partnered with One Voice Central Texas. That's a coalition of over 100 health and human nonprofit service agencies to create a fund. And every year, agencies apply for the passes. It's the agencies that apply for the passes, and the fund then purchases the passes for 50% off, and the agencies then distribute them at no charge to the riders. And TriMet of Portland, Oregon, they work closely with those that need help with their transportation cost, and they have launched a new fare media, the HOP Fast Pass, HOP. The HOP Pass is compatible both with a mobile phone and an electronic card, and riders pay to have stored value on the smart card or through the app, and those qualifying for a reduced fare are issued personalized HOP Pass cards with their photos on them. This low-income program applies to only 3 of their fare products. And the last example would be RTD of Denver, Colorado. They launched their Live program last month that gives people the chance to live their life with more access to opportunity. They collaborated with the Denver Human Services to provide income verification and customer service. So a photo is also required in their verification process, and everything is done all online. So these are the agencies here that use, some of them that use the federal poverty income levels to determine eligibility in reduced fare programs. Several agencies, as you can see, are setting it at 200% or less, but you can see that it does vary among the agencies. And here is a comparison of discounts among those same agencies. So they vary 20% to 72% of the ones that we looked at, but the majority are offering a 50% discount on their low income programs. So this slide shows the options that UTA makes available. As a reminder, so first we have 2 free programs that include the Freedom Access Pass and the Travel Training Program. The Freedom Access Pass, it's an electronic card that we give to our paratransit eligible riders, and they can ride our fixed route services for free. The Travel Training Program is available to educational institutions and social service organizations. It serves refugees, disabled, or elderly, providing them free passes for training purposes. And this training helps them independently use the UTA system so that they can become lifelong users on their own. The next group is our 50% off discount, and that's for seniors, disabled, and Medicare card holders, and that's the discount required by the FTA. And the last in the 50% column is the homeless program. They receive a 50% discount when they distribute fare to the homeless for free. And this is managed through a contract and applies only to our monthly pass, monthly paper pass or tokens, and our paper day passes.
Can you tell me 50% discount of the 250?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they're not monthly passes then?
They could do a monthly, so they can do a monthly, half off the monthly. or they can do a token, which is essentially the $2.50 ride. You wouldn't just be able to go up, but you can purchase a token $2.50 half off, so $1.25, or a day pass. So those are the three things that we let the agencies purchase and then distribute those three Fair Media products to the public or to the homeless. And then the 25% discount is for our Horizon, those that have a Horizon Pass. Those are issued by the Medicaid department, and that's only the monthly pass that they're able to purchase. And then our youth pass is also 25% off.
Do you have any sense of what the utilization rate is for Horizon Pass holders?
I do. It is not very high.
Okay.
Unfortunately, so this month we've had year to date, about less than 100 that have been sold year to date. Last year we had about 800, so it was a little bit more, and I'm checking on the reason for the drop to see if it was anything specific, but we don't sell very many of them.
Do you have any, oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
And I think part of that is just because the immediate outlay of cash at the 25% off is a lot to come up with at once. And the amount of use that the pass probably gets, it's probably cheaper for them to pay per trip, even though it's full price.
Because you don't have to hassle with anything else. I just was curious, and I know you haven't spoken about the special pricing model yet, but I was just curious of all of those, which gets utilized the most.
So right now it's our is being utilized the most, but we also have a lot of participation on our Freedom Access Pass and our travel training. So the special pricing on the last program is our Medicaid Punch Pass, not the Medicare. That was wrong. It's the Medicaid Punch Pass. We don't have a Medicare Punch Pass, so sorry for the typo there.
I was gonna say it should be the senior.
It's the Medicaid Punch Pass. This is a partnership that we have with the State of Utah Department of Health and Human Services, and the Medicaid Punch Pass is a monthly paper punch pass, and it's for riders that are traveling to and from medical appointments only. And every Medicaid recipient receives a paper punch pass. So I want to make mention of a few challenges with our current program. First, UTA pricing is not consistent. It ranges from free to a 50% discount. It has several exceptions and parameters that limit participation. Second, families above the federal poverty line are unserved but still need assistance with reliable transportation. Essentially, we have a gap of people without any reduced fare options that we can offer them. It should also be noted that program administration can be complicated. Eligibility and income verification is a complex process requiring several documents that accompany an application to prove a certain status. And fair media and pass distribution require exceptions. Often fair media must be issued on a one-to-one basis to that specific rider, and pictures of the cardholder are added. So looking here at some recommendations, first would be that UTA has several partnerships, but they need to be strengthened, and we should look for opportunities to grow them. Strong relationships with key individuals will help us understand the needs of the community better, including the groups of people that rely on transportation the most. Second, I recommend that we consolidate our current reduced fare products and discounts into a single low-income program. This will help us simplify fares in general. If we do encompass an approach, an income-based target population would allow us to reach, I think, the greatest number of people and a majority of the groups that I mentioned earlier. Of course, we need to analyze the financial impact of the changes to revenue and operating expenses both, because we do know that changes in the program will have an impact. I shared some challenges on my prior slide, but many things stand in the way of offering a perfect solution. But as we identify the barriers, we should come up with ways to remove them. For example, we can continue to look at the agencies that I've mentioned earlier or that we've done research on so far and learn from them and the things that they have done. We need to acknowledge that we won't have a solution for every rider because of limitations on things such as fair media or eligibility requirements, but we can analyze options that impact the greatest number of people. And last, then we create and actually implement a specific transit assistant program that is more robust than the reduced fare options that we're currently offering, as I showed you in the prior slide. So now I will conclude my presentation. Over the years, UTA has worked with nonprofits and government agencies to provide affordable transportation options. However, there is room to make a greater impact than we are making now. We need to re-examine our reduced fares and look for creative ways to help more people in need. If we want better options than we have today, then I suggest some of the following next steps. We can form a working group to solicit ideas, including internal UTA employees and external stakeholders. We can analyze current reduced fare products for you and show revenue by product, drilling down as far as we can go with the data and come back with those stats. We can compile a strategic plan and a related timeline that you would be able to approve. And once we have approval, we can begin implementing the plan. Thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate all that you are doing for UTA. And if you would like, I'm happy to address your questions, feedback, or listen to any comments that you have to offer on this topic.
Let me start with Kent, and then I'm sure we all have some.
You mentioned that you thought perhaps an income-based way of determining who would be eligible. Does that eliminate then the possibility of working with social service agencies where the income might be possible, but there's a short-term need such as abuse victims or other people that may need to qualify for transit help, but maybe it's not based on income?
No, absolutely not. We can have something for those agencies that can participate in, because a lot of the time they're partnering with us in doing the qualifying and making those decisions, right. Those hard decisions. We actually have a small pilot going on with down in Utah County with Andrew Jackson.
That's the reason that I'm raising the question, because yeah.
It wouldn't exclude that.
I've had communication from Andrew because he wanted to know what this was all about on the agenda.
Did. Yeah.
But then he and I just this morning have shared a number of examples of the help that has come as a result of the pilot program we have going on at Utah County that has been beneficial just in the last week. And so that's the reason why I raised that as an issue, because of that pilot that we're doing. And it is turning out to be very successful. It is not heavily used, but for those who are using it, it has been very beneficial. So I would want to be sure that we do not exclude the opportunity to have that kind of a program like we do down in Utah County.
Yeah, and he actually gave me a couple of sentences here, and I'll just go ahead and share that about an experience that they had. So this was the Center for Women and Children in Crisis said that we had another client who was going through the divorce process with her abusive spouse, and her van died on her. So she couldn't pick up her kids or travel anywhere. She had no money to buy another car and is trying to find a place to live. I was able to get her a transit pass for her and her 4 kids so she can still get around and not have to rely on others to get a ride. She was amazed at how fast and easy it was to get a transit pass. And so if you think about, what Andrew is doing, for us, Andrew is taking those smaller groups and smaller populations and doing the administration for us to simplify it. So that's how we're going to reach out to those smaller population, is through working with agencies like Andrew and others that can do that type of administration that won't put us in a huge bind having to administer, $100 programs, $3,000 programs, and things like that.
So a couple of thoughts I had, as we look at it, and you know your staffing better than I do, but after having worked in the sort of analytics and profitability of a bank, know that the people that are focused on sort of increased sales are not necessarily the ones you send it after community reinvestment project, and their motivations are just different, and it's not a uncaring kind of thing, but the sales pitch is a little bit different, and so maybe one of the things long term you have to have is somebody on your staff whose focus is a little different in securing and nurturing these relationships with providers, and in a sales-like way, but in a way to, like when I see, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but when I think of only 800 passes last year on the Verizon card, we're clearly doing something wrong.
I agree.
In the sense that that number should be in the thousands, really. But so then it makes me go back and think also some of the metrics that we use. While we're using a full fare sort of metrics, I think if we thought about this group as a whole, as a large corporate or EdPass user, our pricing would be slightly different, and that's also a sense of at least looking at sort of profitability standpoint. And I think somewhere in there also we have to factor in is if we look at what is our ridership capacity in our system and our buses, the front runner is a little bit more challenging, I think, probably at peak time, but nevertheless, our cost is pretty much fixed. We've got the operator, we've got the bus, if the bus capacity is not even 75% full, then in there is some costs that we're already incurring. And so to factor that into the equations, unless it's going to require additional buses or something like that, then I'd say we ought to somehow look at that sort of unused capacity as we do some of our analytics. And then I just think the sort of the last piece is, we're really not running our operation as on a profit model basis. We're trying to make things do it, but we have a huge public contribution in sales tax, and that's the general overall sales tax. So if there's a group out there that we're going to subsidize a little bit, this is probably the group that if we're going to talk about fare increases and stuff in the future, we've got to figure out a solution for, because it's really hard to have the other conversation when you've somehow priced this group out of the market. And I would love for it to be a fairly flexible, like the mother of four or the single person who's, even if they just come out of the criminal justice system and they got their first job and they're trying to get to work, we want them to use the system everywhere and to have that mobility and the ability to get around kind of thing. And so, the only thing that strikes me is getting there is some kind of pass that they just can basically use on the system, and then that we figure out either the reimbursement or the compensation through the back end, either through partner agencies or philanthropic or a combination of our contribution. I mean, there's probably a mixture of that, and then I think there probably is some philanthropic interest that might be out there, yeah. And even if it's through a third-party foundation that you market something to get to work or something, kind of thing. I just think that there is some headroom there somewhere where we can do that, but have enough partners out there, as you nurture these things, hitting a broad base, that they do lift that administration work, and acting in the same way as our employer partners do, knowing who they're turning on and turning off and reconciling the payments and those kind of things so that our end is, somewhat simplified. And you may have to compensate them a little bit for their administrative time. But anyway, I just think we almost have to solve this issue before we can have the broader fair discussion, both politically and ethically, to try to get there if we can. But I don't know. Did you have anything, Beth?
No.
Sorry, I went on long.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I was thinking about this too, and you mentioned that RTD, the Denver agency, had structured it so that the fare was $1, I think is what you said on that, or
Not on that one.
not on that one. Oh, sorry. Well, I was wondering, just extrapolating that, if there's an opportunity to work with the agencies in order to understand what the fare structure would be and the cost analysis on that, and if that would then thus simplify the process in terms of looking at these various passer programs that we currently have, and maybe there's a way to just say if we can do it, and I don't know if $1 is like the right amount, but we look at we look at the analytics and the utilization and see what that could actually equate to, recognizing I would agree with Carlton. I think that having somebody within your group that kind of says, okay, that my outreach and my goals are slightly different, and understanding where to access the people in need and getting with those agencies and continuing that level of networking and engagement, I think could be really valuable as well. So I appreciate this. This is really helpful, and it's always a bit of a challenge because you want to balance it out between, we want to make it as smooth as possible, right? We don't want to overly burdensome our own groups with the distribution and that, but we want to make sure that everybody knows about it, so make it somewhat seamless. So that's just my comment, but thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other thoughts? This is great. Yes.
Yeah, a couple of questions perhaps. Do we have here in the state state agencies that have their hand on the pulse of low-income people
So we have
and where they may live?
We should. I'm not sure on where they live, but I know that we've partnered before with the Department of Workforce Services, and I would imagine they have zip codes.
Are there other social agencies besides the Department of Workforce Services?
The Department of Human Health, the State Department of Health.
I'm just wondering, there's these agencies that really have their hand on the pulse of the people that would qualify here. Are we working with them to identify where their populations reside, and do they have any idea of where those populations need to go to from where they live? In order to provide the service, we've got to be able to move them from where they live to where they need to go, whether that be to work or to hospitals or wherever. And I'm just wondering if we could get that kind of information and then begin to hone in on those people. I'm all for providing the kind of service that will enable them to better their lives. And I think we need to go out of our way to make that possible. But if we can identify that group of people or those people.
DWS has some super impressive analytics. You think it's just a job thing, but they actually have a lot of federal programs and even some money to do just.
Well, that was you've already answered the question that I was going to raise then, because if we can identify and if they've got some funding, maybe we can somehow work with them as the philanthropic agency that then pays for the opportunity for these people to get on our system. And I certainly would hope that we're doing that. That would be a great effort. I don't know if it's in your particular department or some
It would
other.
be. I can reach out to them again.
If you need any help there, I'd be happy to assist you with having
You
it.
probably know some people.
Yeah, I
That'd be
used
great.
to work with them quite a bit, but they do have an analytics team that are super sharp.
Well, I think if we could identify who this program is intended to reach, they're trying to reach the same people.
Sure.
And if we can link together, I think we could provide a real important service, taking advantage of the fact that we've got fixed costs, and the increment of a half a dozen additional riders on a bus route is not going to increase or decrease our costs a bit.
No, and I also think, I mean, even if you think about it in a purely capitalistic form, there are a lot of major employers who are desperate for employees and can't figure out how to get the employees to their sites. Now, some of their sites are sadly in bad transit locations, but some of them aren't too far away. And, and I think if they could facilitate, they might even contribute toward it. And, I just, not too unlike the Amazon deal, they're just trying to figure out how to get employees there.
I think one of the things that should be mentioned too is that a lot of times the challenge is that just statistically speaking, people with income challenges and hitting those poverty levels, they are moving around a lot. They have difficulty finding, stable housing. And that creates its own level of challenge as well. So I that's why I think the partnerships are really, really valuable, because that connection can always be on that data as opposed to that address, if that makes any sense. So, but anyway, thank you again. This is a great dialogue.
Appreciate it. So if you're okay, then we'll go ahead and pull some data, compile a strategic plan, potential timeline, and then come back before you all and get more comments on that.
Sounds great. Let us know how we can help.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is an opportunity for bond refunding and new money issuance. And Bob, you're going to lead the way, but it looks like you have a few paid henchmen out there in the audience.
Yeah, I don't know about paid henchmen, but it is a team anytime you look at a refunding.
Yes, it is.
And, okay. So I would invite Brian Baker up here, who's the financial advisor from Zion's Public Finance and is your financial advisor too, and of course helps me, and as well as Bob Kenny, who's with Wells Fargo, who we've selected to be the lead underwriter in this particular endeavor. And we also have Blake Wade in the audience, who's our bond counsel. So you're seeing a team here, but there are probably dozens of people supporting this entire team right now to work on this. So just to talk about why we're even here, you have to look at interest rates. And the red line on the left and the green line are on the right are the interest rates as of September 6th. And you can see those are at historic lows over most of the yield curve, 1 to 30 years. And if you compare it to the yield curves just 9 months before or a year before, we're substantially underneath those rates too. So now that we have our bond underwriters on board, they made several recommendations as we were going through the selection process and felt like we needed to get going on this. With interest rates low, you strike when the iron's hot. So it seems to be that way. So as we talked to the finance team, there were a couple of things that we want to consider when we're looking at the refunding, and that includes a restructuring also. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. On the refunding bond part of this, you want to make sure you have net present value savings of 5% or more. That's generally a rule of thumb. And so we'll show you that information. We also talked about lowering our maximum annual debt service. I'll show you what that current debt service curve looks like and why that's an important consideration for us as we look at the refunding bonds, and as also we look at restructuring the bonds and taking down that maximum debt service. Another thing we wanted to accomplish is most of our early bonds had a June principal payment. We're on a fiscal year, calendar year, so December 15th makes more sense. And as we look through this, we're going to be able to move, we think, about 24% of those June 15th payments to December 15th and still achieve the other goals. On the refunding bonds, of course, you want to look at refunding efficiency. Present value savings is one part of it, but you also want to make sure that you're having an efficient refunding. And so we'll talk about that. We have the refunding savings reserve. We said, are there any dollars in there that we need to use to make this work? And so we'll talk about that just a little bit. And then another idea from the underwriters and financial advisor, should we consider any of these that are subordinate debt, taking it to a senior debt? We have lots of room under the senior debt, not as much under subordinate. Again, looking at the debt service ratios, what should we do there? So we're actually going to be bringing forth to you 3 different things on the refunding and restructuring. And even within the refunding, we'll talk about 2 different options under the refunding. One is just a pure refunding, one's a refunding with a restructuring to try to get to the lowering the maximum annual debt service. So this is what our debt service looks like right now. So the goal under the refunding would be to lower the bars. Under restructure, the intent is to level out the bars. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to ask Brian Baker to start going through the different refunding opportunities, and then he and Bob will be talking about that. And once we've talked about the refunding, then we'll come talk about the bond issues to support our 5-year capital plan.
Greetings, happy to be here with you today. Really, since the start of this year, we've seen interest rates kind of fall off a cliff. And again, being an economist an interest rate forecaster is kind of like being a weather person. They generally keep their job whether they're right or not. But for approximately the last 10 years, people have been saying rates need to move higher, they need to move higher, and they had somewhat taken off as if they were headed in that direction. And then over the last half a year, you've really seen interest rates come down quite substantially. And so that created a lot of opportunity. The Tax Reform Act of 2017 made it so you couldn't do tax-exempt advance refunding. So we're actually looking at refundings where you have significant savings by refinancing tax-exempt bonds with new taxable bonds, where taxable rates are so low that you can the savings we're discussing about on these refinancings are using taxable bonds to replace tax-exempt bonds, which sounds counterintuitive, but it tells you how far rates have fallen. So the first bond issue that we're looking at is our 2012 bonds, where you have remaining some 5% coupons in 2042 and some 4% coupons in 2039. And essentially the idea there is that you can go in and you can refinance that specific set of bonds. You can look at, well, the rates from a couple of weeks ago were somewhere on the order for that entire thing of about 14.5% net present value savings, almost $25 million in net present value savings. That does lower the maximum annual debt service by almost $9 million. You can see the size. It's about $171 million worth of bonds that is being taken out. And because rates are so low, you refinance those and create an escrow that includes enough to make both the principal and interest payments on those bonds up until the call date. So you're actually issuing, in this scenario, $185 million to replace $171 million and saving $25.5 million.
The call date on the 2012 bonds is 2022?
Correct.
So they're 10-year call?
Yes, and so essentially we'd create an escrow that would sit there for the next 2 years and would make the payments until that call date, at which point they would all disappear. But from a legal perspective, once a refunding transaction is done and you've created the escrow that is airtight, they come off the books of the authority and are replaced by the new refinancing bonds. The other consideration here, these bonds, because they have very high coupon rates at 4 and 5%, that there's a high efficiency, meaning that the escrow that we create is very seamless. It's about 77% efficient. We're not reliant on any of the refunding savings reserve in this case. We would not be using it for this purpose. And we are recommending on this one that these are subordinated 2012 bonds. They're on their subordinate lien, and we would recommend moving them to the senior lien. You have capacity on both, but the senior lien gets you about 15 basis points lower interest rates. And because you have capacity on both, the thought was simply, if it's sixes, why would we not take the deal that has better savings? Okay. In terms of capacity, if you look at, so this chart right here, the histogram, each bar, the height of that bar is the debt service due in that year. The yellow line up above that, well, actually, I guess we can start with the red line. The red line is 12 months of sales tax, and that's what we use when rating agencies look at your debt. They say, okay, what is the sales tax that is pledged towards this? And so that red line represents that sales tax. The yellow line represents the 1.2 times coverage that is the legal requirement that the authority has under the indenture. So on an aggregate basis, your senior and subordinated debt need to be covered at least 1.2 times by the sales tax revenues that are pledged. So you can see that there is a decent amount of headroom, even on the top of that very highest histogram line there. But the goal is to kind of to reduce that, to bring that down, because as we do that, your ratios look better, and it makes it a little easier to look out in future planning and feel comfortable and confident that that the debt level is manageable and the authority will be able to make payments. And that's something that we want, obviously, the organization and the public and everybody to have confidence in. So when we look at these savings, there are two ways to consider them. Oftentimes when we do a refinancing, for instance, if you refinance your home mortgage and you can lower your mortgage payment from $1,500 to $1,300, that's normally what you do. You just lower it straight across the board, pro rata over the remaining life of the mortgage. And that's what is represented by the top chart there. The idea that you can have level annual savings over the entire period of the refinancing out until 2042 is significant, and the savings are there. And we wanted to show that, to demonstrate that there are significant savings if we just do a very plain vanilla, simple, traditional refunding. The bottom portion of the slide shows what the savings would look like if we said, let's go back to this and try to fit the refunded debt in a way that helps to lower that maximum annual debt service and level out some of those payments in the later years. And so you can see from 2027 through 2036, those debt service numbers are higher than they are either just before or just after. And so the idea would be looking at those numbers and saying, is there a way that makes sense, that still brings us significant savings, but that also helps with the structuring, so that as we look at the aggregate debt profile, we say, you know what, that feels a little bit more comfortable and makes us breathe a little bit easier. And so that would be the goal of that lower portion of the slide there. You can see where we would essentially be taking the savings, applying the savings, using them in some of those years where debt service is significantly higher, and then, in fact, moving a little bit of the debt to where you have savings in some of those at the end here, years 37 through 42, where you have significant excess capacity relative to the prior years. Does anyone have any questions about that, the thinking there and kind of the strategy? Yep.
I do. My only question is because I do understand where you're going with that. So 2036, according to this chart, would be a little bit higher. Where does that put us in terms of our overall requirements?
Well, so in this chart on the bottom one, the black lines are our savings. And so what that would do is that would take that line there for 2036, which has a lot of subordinated debt on it, and brings that level down significantly. And as we talked to you about the other two portions of what we are proposing on both restructuring and refinancing, they kind of work together. That was a place where where you could take savings in 2036 and lower that number that you're not necessarily able to do in the other strategies that we're looking at in the same way. And so that's why there's outsized savings in that year.
The other point I might make, and again, I'll introduce myself, Bob Kenny from Wells Fargo Securities. From a rating agency perspective, if they were to look at that structure in a vacuum, they would ask the question, why are you creating all these DIS savings in these, out years? But if they look at it in the context of what your overall debt structure looks like, which Brian showed you, they can tell that what you're doing is you're continuing to smooth your debt service pattern. And they'd much rather see for a transit agency less choppy debt service or less ascending and keep going higher. They'd much rather see it smooth out. So from that perspective, they will not have an issue with that structuring pattern.
So the sort of the cost to us really is that 0.45% of net present value.
Yes, yeah, and it's really
Be able to do that.
It's really taking the savings and just kind of moving them around and fitting them into the pockets where it makes the most sense for the aggregate debt service structure. And yeah, you can see there is some limited cost to the overall savings in doing that.
Probably helps Bob sleep more at night.
That's the goal.
We'll get you to the final slide in a few
Okay.
slides.
So, and essentially, there are three different aspects of this I'm going to talk about. So that's the first one. It's the 2012. It's the refinancing of the 2012 bonds purely for savings. They're the most. They generate the highest savings, and they're the most kind of slam dunk. You'd look at it and say, well, why wouldn't we want to save 15%? And whether you took it as level savings or as structured savings, either way, it makes an incredible amount of sense to consider that. Although we would recommend considering the structured savings for the aggregate benefits that it provides. The second is your 2015 bonds. So think these were just issued 4 years ago, and lots of it was a restructuring with incredible savings being generated. Over $100 million in gross savings was generated by the 2015 senior and subordinate refinancing. And here we are 4 years later, and we have debt. We have bonds from that bond issue that can be refinanced with taxable bonds to generate savings. And so this is looking at those years from the 2015 senior bonds that generate the best results. Not all of them. This doesn't include all of them because it includes the ones that are the most economically efficient to refinance. But you can see with about $100 million of bonds being refinanced, you generate about $7.5 million of savings, or about 7.5% in net present value savings. We're able to lower maximum annual debt service. We're able to move principal payments to December. These are slightly less efficient, and part of the reason they're slightly less efficient is that, as Trustee Millington pointed out, our escrow on the 2012 bonds goes out to 2022. The escrow on the 2015 bonds goes out to 2025. So it exists for 3 more years, which makes it generally less efficient. So the refunding efficiency on these is approximately 50%. We are again not using any of the refunding savings reserve, and we are able to, what we're doing is we're keeping the senior bonds as senior bonds. And so again, you can see you can take level savings over the entire life out through 2038, which is the life of the bonds, that the portion of the bonds we're refinancing goes out to 2038. Or you can take within that same footprint the savings from years where we might deem it less helpful or less necessary, and you can put it in those years, again, that exact footprint, 2027 to 2036, where we have the higher debt service levels, and say, let's bring those debt service levels down in those years, because on balance, we'd prefer to take the savings where it's most needed, or where it brings the aggregate debt service level down, as opposed to taking it a little bit every single year, some in years where it might be less helpful because it doesn't bring down our maximum debt burden. You can see again, there's a slight difference in the savings calculations between the top structure with level savings and the bottom where we kind of shape it, and that's simply just moving the pieces around and figuring out a way to do it that brings the best benefit with the structured savings on the bottom. Any questions about that?
It looks, though, that you actually retire that debt a couple of years earlier.
Yeah. Ironically, in this case, we would be retiring the debt that originally went up to 2038. We'd be getting rid of it by Well, actually, no, that's taking the savings in between 2027 and 2036. The life of the bonds would still go out through 2038.
Okay.
And again, you'd have some bonds out there past that kind of debt service, that elevated level that runs for 10 years.
We need you to push your button there so we make sure we get you. Oh, you just have to do it once. There you go.
You're taking a higher level of savings in those years. So that's reflecting savings rather than debt service.
Oh, I see.
So these are the first two proposals. One is the 2012 with significant refunding savings, then the 2015s with also significant savings, but less than the 2012s. And these are both pure refinancing plays that if you only had one bond issue and it was the 2015 senior bonds, we'd still come to you and say, you know what, you should consider refinancing these. In that case, we'd be recommending level savings, but in the case of your overall debt structure, we'd recommend using the more structured savings. So the third piece of this is what we're calling a pure restructuring play, where it's not being done for savings, but it also does not cost you money to do. And so this is taking some of the 2015 subordinated bonds and refinancing those. And the reason those work in this case is because they exist in those years where there is the highest maximum annual debt service. And so what you can see here is the refinancing of about $125 million worth of subordinated debt. The net cost, the net savings, as you can see on the chart, is around 2%. So there's if you just did it purely level, you could refinance these and save a little bit of money, a couple of $1 million, which sounds significant on balance for the overall UTA debt structure. It's not considerably significant. Or you could take the bottom slide shows what we could do if we took those same bonds and refinanced them and essentially took savings in those years where we have elevated debt service in the 27 through 36, and then essentially moved some of those principal payments further out to the 2042 footprint, where you would then, if we look at that bottom right hand graphic, you can see that blue line on the top is the prior debt service, and then the orange line, or red lines, I can't tell if that's red or orange, but the red line would represent what would happen to that overall debt service level as a result of this restructuring. So you see that in those years where the debt level was the most elevated, it is brought down the most. And then after that elevated period is over, we actually put in some additional principal that wasn't there before to kind of fill in some of the gaps. We do not extend the life of the debt beyond 2042, which is the current final payment on all of your bonds, which is a good thing. When your bonds were originally issued, some of them were issued for 30 years, and some of them with capitalized interest for a year or two. So some of them went out 30 or 32 years from when they were issued. Now your final payment goes out 23 years. So you've created significant space at the back there, which this preserves and kind of leaves that opening there.
And we do want to be clear, there is a slight cost to this particular refunding or restructuring scenario. So it's, $2.6 million to lower the maximum annual debt service.
Yep, and what this does is it dovetails with the other two. And so by putting all of them together, you realize significant savings and also accomplish the goal of bringing down the maximum annual debt service level. So this again, we'd consider the first two, you could do them as simple refinancing plays with significant level savings, and they also have significant savings when done under the structured plan. On this one, you have slight savings if you take them on a level basis, and you have slight dis savings if you take them on the structured basis that we're looking at and considering here.
Overall, then what ends up being your savings, I guess, if you do all three scenarios?
Glad you asked. We'll get there.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there's a good piece to that.
There's a slide, I guess we'll go to page, I guess it's 11. Did you just click it? Yeah, so there it is. So there's a summary page on page 11, and then there's a picture that gives you a better graphic as to what things look like, and then even an actual cash flow page that would show you how you're taking your savings But again, as Bob pointed out, you have bonds that produce savings. That's that first bullet point there that has what the net present values are in aggregate for just the savings bonds. And then when you add the restructuring bonds, I'll have to flip the page to get to where that is. So you can first see the picture, which is on page 12. Have it there. I mean, there it is. So again, there's that bar chart that Bob had showed you originally. The dotted line is what your prior aggregate debt service was, and you can see how we've created a lot of space below that line, dotted line in that period from 7 through 36. And then we've increased the bars in the back end overall. So you can see it's obviously higher than the dotted line. And if you look at the next page, you'll actually see the cash flow savings and or dis savings, depending on what year you're looking at. So you have savings that run annually all the way through fiscal year 36, and then your dis savings are in the back. And if you look at that on an aggregate basis, it actually costs $8.2 million overall. But on a present value basis, and we didn't throw that number down here, but on a present value basis, the savings are roughly 28 million on a present value basis, because all the savings are earlier than the dis savings, which are in the back end. And again, I'll point out what I said earlier about the rating agencies would look at the structure like this and say, wow, 70 million of dis savings in 41 and 42. What it's doing is smoothing out the tail of your overall debt service. And, you know, as a transit agency, they'd much rather see something like that. And you're taking your peak years down. So your MADs, or that coverage area where your maximum annual debt service is used to calculate what your coverage is, which is an important point for the rating agencies, that drops by, at least before and after, the difference is roughly 13 million or 12.9 million. That was on that other bullet point.
So that was the refunding restructuring part of today's presentation. Before we get into the capital plan considerations, what questions do you have about this concept? We are obviously recommending the refunding and restructuring part of this because we think the maximum annual debt service reduction is an important thing to do for the agency.
The biggest question I have, and you know, in general concept, I'm comfortable with it, but and I don't anticipate being here in I'm hoping I'm like alive in 2042, but there is some question to that one too. I guess in the scope of things, we really weren't going to be able to do much in a large capital way under current revenue scenarios and debt scenarios anyway, right? Correct? Realistically.
So there's two things to consider.
Without
One,
new revenue sources.
yeah, one is, we're really restricted more by our budget ability. So of course, this would free up in those out years some additional room. It also has the rating considerations and how they look at the agency. So this does free up room and give some flexibility for the agency in those years.
Other questions, however, Carolyn, you look like you had a thought or a comment.
Bob, if you could address to the board, if there was a need, and I think Trustee Christensen mentioned this, the chair, is the ability to bond for a major capital project in the future, say front runner or something like that. What would be recommended if we had to do that in, say, 7 years from now?
So obviously we'd look at, some of the considerations that Brian talked about, what's your room underneath the various structures, indentures. So you consider that, but then you also have to look at your long-term financial plan. If it's replacing what we have today, right now we're considering doing that with cash. So using bonds would actually improve our long-term forecast.
And you have some thoughts?
I'd say also, we were asked a couple of years ago as the legislature was looking at governance and such to estimate what UTA's debt incurring capacity was. And if you look back at this, this slide here works just great, where you could have annual payments right now. Well, let's go back here. You could have annual payments that are as high as about $235 million which gives you, yeah, that's the yellow line, which gives you $70+ million above where your revenues are right now. And then once you get past 2042, when you have no debt, you could literally drop, I mean, this, no one is recommending this. I'm just saying if you were looking at capacity, you could literally drop $235 million worth of debt payment in each of those years from 2043 to 2049. And so you could conceivably borrow well over $1 billion in new money. And again, as Bob mentioned, it's more of a cash flow issue and how the authority would manage that, rather than do you have the legal ability to borrow for a large capital project? Because I'm quite confident that there is significant capacity. You would be more hamstrung by how do we make the payments on that and how do we fit it into our overall capital structure than by do we have the legal ability to do it.
But if somehow we got an additional revenue source or contribution, say from the state, it would give us a little better position, assuming that we're the bonding entity.
Yep, absolutely.
And so providing that additional room gives that flexibility if there are other needs.
I'll add one more comment to, well, you were ready to ask a question, so.
I just wanted to ask the question about the fact that 'cause we just talked about how we would have the ability to do it legally in terms of do a bonding, but what would that look like structurally if we did the full restructuring plan and we had to go out to bond in terms of practicality and the actual payment of that? You said legally it's doable, but what were the other components that would make that more challenging?
Well, I mean, it's simply when the projects were completely underway and the Great Recession hit and the question came to the board of, well, do we keep plowing ahead with these projects and save a lot of money and keep a lot of people employed and you know, do what we told our constituents we would do, or do we pull back on the projects? There was a choice there, and that when the choice was made to unanimously go forward with the projects and continue building them, that brought those debt ratios down, and it made us closer to our legal requirements. And so, if the authority were to try to borrow $1 billion right now, the consideration would simply be, we can put all the principal at the end and maybe even do interest only for the first number of years, but how do we do that in such a way that makes it so we don't have to reduce service, or so so that there aren't other trade-offs that we're looking at and saying, man, if we're going to make that debt payment out there, we either need to see our revenues increase significantly, which is another thing that, if you continue to have 4 to 5% revenue increases annually in 7 years, when you come back to look at this, you would have tens of millions of dollars more capacity each year that wasn't there previously, and you would have that additional means to service that debt.
You're going to say something?
I was just going to make one additional comment. As Bob started this presentation off by talking about the interest rate environment currently looks like, and we're at historic lows in both taxable and tax exempt rates. Sitting in your chair, the question is, and we talked about what the call dates are on each of these two series of bonds, the 12s and the 15s. Since you don't have the opportunity to do a tax exempt advance refunding, which would mean refund the bonds tax exempt in advance of the call date, it's because taxable rates are lower that you could do this advance refunding. The option is to wait until 2022, try and guess where interest rates might be in 22 and determine whether or not savings could be greater at that point. And same with the 25s. You could wait till 2025 to refund those on a tax exempt basis. But you have, by that point, you'd forego $25.5 million worth of cash flow savings through 2025, and you're at an all-time low level of interest rates currently. So that's a thought process. And the other thing we also did was when we structured these taxable bonds, we also structured them with a 10-year call as well. So once those bonds are issued, you'll have the ability to analyze the market at least another time to do another refinancing of that debt 10 years out, which who knows where interest rates will be at that time, but we are offering, or we wouldn't recommend not including that call in the structure.
And I'm assuming, could you refund a taxable bond with a tax exempt bond at that 10-year call?
So we can only have one tax exempt issue outstanding at a time. So once the tax exempt bonds are taken, then we could do a second tax exempt refunding.
Meaning that as soon as 2022,
For the original
once we eliminate
2012s,
the
and as soon as
escrow.
2025 for the 2015s, you could look at refinancing those portions of a 2019 bond issue that were taxable
Back
with
to
tax
tax
exempt
Right.
bonds. Okay.
There's been discussion with Congress to try to get the tax exempt advance refunding back. There hasn't been a lot of traction with that. I don't know that anything will
Interesting.
happen. What's been interesting is that we've seen a lot of taxable proposals, because taxable rates are so low that takes some of the pressure off pushing Congress to restore the tax exempt advance refunding. But you see what can be done.
So just to clarify in my own head, so the overall cost of all of these of this restructuring would be $8 million roughly, with a 28 million overall saved. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
It's the $8 million comes when you look at the gross cash flow savings each year. And and so essentially the dollar that you save next year is worth more than the extra dollar you pay 23 years from now. And so typically when we talk about savings, we always talk about net present value savings, discounting all of the savings, and in this case, savings, because we're putting some bonds out in years where they didn't exist. When you discount all of those back to the present day, that's where you get the $28 million in net benefit to the authority.
Okay.
Yeah, and this slide shows that, if interest rates hold, it's about $32 million net present value savings from the combined refunding and restructuring. And you get to lower your maximum annual debt service by almost $13 million. And you get to move your principal payments to December 15th. There's a cost to that, but that's also rolled into these numbers.
Is that
And-
cost high, the roll to December 15th?
It's not particularly high. We looked at doing it for the next 2 years and rejected that idea because there was a little bit of cost, but it wasn't very much. By the time you take into account how much we would earn by the delay, this looks at what does it cost you to delay, but then there's also earnings. But it still had a bit of a cost for us, so we're not making that part of this recommendation.
Okay. Questions on the refunding restructuring part? Okay.
And so now let's talk about the new money bonds. Yesterday you talked about the 5-year capital plan. And the reason we're talking about this right now is if you're going to do a bond issue in 2020, but you're also going to do a refunding later this year, does it make sense? Is really the question we asked. Does it make sense to move that issue forward into this year because of low interest rates, lowering cost of issuance? So in the 5-year plan, we have $66.7 million for 2020 and 2022. Let's look at both of them while we're here. So that's what we'll be talking about next. So we asked for some projections on what the payments would be. And here's the payment structure on that. You notice the principal is quite a bit lower. It's because there's 5% coupons and there would be some premiums paid on that. So the actual principal amount. And this is based on almost a $70 million net bond proceeds projection. In the ordinance, we'll probably put in $71 to $72 million just to make sure that we can handle any changes in the market and not have to come back to the board. So that's the projection. The question is, so what does that look like compared to what's in our current TFP? And so we did a comparison. Our current TFP in 2020 assumes $1 million. If you move those bond issues forward, it's $2.7 million in 2020. So $1.7 million additional debt service. Again, because you're moving them forward as much as 2 years or a year. 2021, that decreases. 2022, it decreases again. Starting in 2025, you start seeing reductions in our long-term forecast. And actually 2027 thereafter, it's almost $500,000 savings per year for, I believe that's 17 years. So the overall gross savings is about $5.6 million compared to what we have in our long-term forecast. So combining all of these and looking at what would be the effect on our annual debt service, We've shown each of the refunding or restructuring and the amount of savings from 2020 through 2024, and then shown the effect of moving the 5-year capital money into a 2029 issue. So for next year, it'd be about $1.5 million reduction in our debt service, moving up to 3 million, moving up to 3.3, then moving up to 3.6 million. And then below, we've shown the savings for all the future years or the cost in the out years that we've already talked about. So again, looking at 2027 through 2036, you're looking at $13 million to $17 million reduction in our long-term forecast if we can achieve, what's being proposed today.
And these were 20-year bonds, right? These new issuances.
These go through 2044, I believe.
Okay.
So 25-year, the first 5 years interest only, and then principal payments after that. That's what we had modeled in our long-term financial forecast.
And is the interest only a factor of construction, or is that just a cash flow? On those first five years of
Oh,
interest
just
only?
cash flow.
Just the cash flow?
Cash flow.
Okay.
And I'd say just working with a lot of entities, if they have one bond issue and they say, you know what, this is our only debt, we'd like to go 5 years without making a principal payment on it, then that would raise some eyebrows with the rating agencies. But in a case where you have $2 billion worth of debt and you have an aggregate debt service structure, that's what they're looking at more than anything, is how does this current bond issue affect this overall structure that we're looking at?
And so our recommendations, I think we've gone through all of them, is refund the 2012 subordinate bonds, make them senior lien, do the restructure, refund the 2015 senior bonds, do it for savings and restructure. Restructure the selected 2015 bonds to lower the maximum annual debt service, move all the principal payments to December 15th on each of these, use the senior lien for the new money. Didn't really talk about that, but there's plenty of room under the senior lien. You get the lower interest rate, and the new money bonds would be tax exempt. So there'd be 2 different series here, and actually 3, right? Because we're doing some subordinate, some senior, and some senior new money. We can't do an easy one. We have to make it as complicated as possible. And then something we want to make sure, it's a recommendation that we use negotiated sale because of the changing interest rates. We may have to lower the amount if interest rates go up. Some securities would fall out, and so they wouldn't meet our criteria for the savings. And I still remember Snowmageddon, the 2015 bonds that we did, and the markets were closing down in New York because of the predicted snow. And this team worked over the weekend to get it ready so we could get the bonds sold before the markets shut down that day. So important to look at negotiated and have the flexibility.
We want to do that before the snow flies.
Yeah. Yeah, and we almost hit the lowest interest rate at that time. We were a week early, but we were very successful on the 2015. So those are our recommendations. Any concerns about the recommendations?
So the total amount that you're talking about is,
About 455 million
I was
on
going
the
to say about
refunding.
450.
Yeah, about 455, and then on the new money's about 71 million. And that's what would, right now, what we're anticipating would be in a resolution that would come to you with parameters authorizing us to go forward and keep pursuing the refunding and the new money. And we actually have a calendar of events. Next week, we'll be talking to local advisory council, presenting pretty much the same information, see what comments they have or suggestions. We're looking at October 9th for a market update to the board, considering doing a resolution authorization to proceed within certain parameters. We've got a date with the State Bonding Commission to go over the same material and say, you know, they have a resolution also that would be authorizing us to move forward under certain parameters. And right now we've got November 6th set as the sale date. Again, that could move around a little bit. We're anticipating that even though you've given us parameters, you'll want to know the results of the sale and approve the bond purchase agreement on the same date. So we'll schedule the sale early in the morning before the board meeting and have to update you that day on the results. And then
Any way that we can accelerate that?
Not a ton.
A couple things to keep in mind. With the new money bond, we're required to hold a public hearing.
Right.
So we've scheduled that for October 30th.
Okay.
And we have to publish twice
Okay.
before we hold the
All right.
hearing.
That was my
So-
question as to why that delay. If you're gonna get the bonding commission approval in October, like, why do you still have to wait
why
another
3
45 days-ish or whatever?
We can back some of that up, but we do have the requirement to hold the public hearing and run the contest period. So there's some.
Those are
we're trying to get
structured
those done as
timelines.
quickly as we can.
Okay.
So you would anticipate, even though we've got 3 issues here, you'd anticipate doing them all on the same day then?
Correct.
Yep. In fact, there's
Okay.
one offering document, like for stocks, they talk about a prospectus, and it's similar. It's called an official statement.
Right.
And we would have literally 3 different series where you'd have senior tax exempt bonds, senior taxable bonds, and subordinate taxable bonds, all listed with their relative amounts. And we'd use that document to the underwriters would market
All right.
to investors in that way.
They,
Tie that up
okay.
all on the same day.
The state law allows for a delegation part of the resolution, so we can, resolution that we've drafted so far would delegate to, you can decide who you want to have on that delegation committee. That way, if you decide there's a great day in the market and you want to get in sooner and it doesn't line up with the board date, we can set that up so that you have that flexibility if you'd like. As you talked about acceleration with that, so we can look at that.
Bob, we went through the capital list yesterday, and there were a couple of questions on some stuff, but there also may be some interest about projects that have some time constraints, at least time constraints if we're going to use the same numbers. When do we need to pick some of those projects, and sort of when do you need that feedback in regards to both timing of our presentation to the local advisory council and maybe any subsequent budget amendments if needed?
Certainly. So again, we'll do the resolution looking at 71 million principal. There's some room under the numbers that we have right now to add in if you need to add in or just shift around some numbers. The sale date, November 6th, we'd have to have a firm number a week or two before.
You'd probably like to have a close to final number for the POS, but that can change because as you pointed out, when we go to market, if bonds drop out because rates are such that you don't want to include a particular series, market will adjust or will adjust when we're selling, so.
So on the 9th of October, we'll have the preliminary official statement that, again, will be used to market some of this. So it will include that 71 million on the 9th. Before we go out to sell, we'll want to have the amount that we really are asking for on the new money. And it really just affects the new money. On the refunding, we'll be doing the calculations as we go along and only including those ones that make the financial sense on the refunding, straight refunding part of it.
Now, the interest rates have dropped quite a bit in the last 6 months. This is looking out another 2 or 3 months. Is there anything on the horizon that might bump those interest rates up and negate what's going on here? Now, I understand that there's some pressure on the Fed to reduce the interest rates by another quarter, but then there might be some pressures between now and then. What does your crystal ball tell you at this point in time?
As the lawyer at the table, I love when you ask that question because I can just watch these guys squirm a little bit.
I can guarantee, just kidding, those are words that I'm not allowed to ever speak. But
Not in the interest rate world.
not in the interest rate world. The interesting thing is the Fed is expected to cut rates by 25 basis points today, and that's already priced into the market. And so what's interesting is their language today about, whether they think there might be a further cut or whether things are better than they think. And so the market will play off of that. One thing that the Trump administration has brought to the interest rate markets is volatility. And so
No kidding.
last week, at the end of the week, municipal bonds had one of the worst weeks that they'd had in a year and a half, where rates went up significantly in both the Treasury and municipal market last week. And then this week they've dropped
back
15
down.
basis points again. And so they're just kind of moving around a lot. And so there isn't anybody that is projecting an immediate increase in interest rates. There's nobody that's saying we believe that you might see a sharp spike in interest rates coming soon. So our thought is that we're going to get this ready as quickly as we can and hope that rates continue to trend sideways to down as they have for a while. But, anytime there's...
That's part of the reason why I asked if this could be accelerated to take advantage of the low rates now, because I don't know what happens in that period of time.
In the middle of last week, there was some chatter about a possible trade agreement with China or pushing off some of the tariffs, and that's what caused people thought, oh, that's good news, and so rates went higher. And then over the weekend, when the Saudi oil fields were bombed with drone strikes and things, then rates came back down because that was bad news. And so as those things play out,
Right.
we'll continue to see things move around.
Well, part of the reason that I'm very interested, and I hope that we can get after this right away. My question all along has been, how quickly can we get this done? And I see the timetable, and that's about as aggressive as you really can be. And I understand that. But part of the reason is we've got some projects out there that really need some attention and to move forward for our efficiency reasons. For example, we've got a project down in the city of Vineyard where we need to finish a front runner station and do some double tracking. And we're looking at probably a $10 million number there, and we keep looking at that number pretty carefully. But everybody seems to feel comfortable around the $10 million. And we would like to see that get rolled into this new money funding, and so that we can move quickly with that project. And there's probably another couple of projects, and we've talked about that, to get these projects done because they have significant impact on the efficiency of our front runner operations. And so we're looking at that, and we'll be talking as we move forward about increasing perhaps that new money just a little bit in order to cover that one and maybe another project at the Ogden BRT, so that we can move quickly. And if we did that, then this funding, we would then be assured that we could move those projects forward. And so we're very interested in this refunding. It's very timely for a number of reasons, but operationally, it's also very beneficial to us. So thank you for your work here.
Well, I do want to give credit to these folks. You might remember you just hired Bob last week.
Yes, we remember that.
You're probably doing free gratis for like a week.
So we've been working on this for a while, knowing that the date we had to hit was local advisory council. And so we've been doing the work to speed this up and get to a November 6th sale date. If we had missed the local advisory council next week, that would have set us back a couple of months.
We don't want to miss
We
that.
don't
So
wanna
thank
miss
you
that.
for your work.
Yeah.
Happy to do it.
So there's a suggestion on those two projects at least. Any concern about us looking at that? Beth, are you good with that?
So, yeah, officially just wanted to say, I think that's exactly the way that we're looking at it. We're looking at Vineyard being the number one issue, but Ogden Bus Rapid Transit is right behind that. And so I would echo what Kent has said in terms of the timelines and anything we can do to get these projects addressed and dealt with. So thank you.
So Carolyn, maybe as you review or go over that with staff, you can determine sort of what that gap needs to be, and working with Bob and
Yep, we will do that.
getting that number. So I want you to be comfortable with that. So.
And just to be sure, you want us to proceed as we've
Yes,
recommended?
yes.
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 Although that's not an official vote, but yes. All right. And you really are not henchmen, so thank you for your service.
Mr. Chair, we've been called much worse than that.
Okay. We're grateful for your experience and your talent. So I think that may conclude. Just a note that our next meeting will be on September the 25th at 9 a.m. With that, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned.